Nation of Israel, also the nation of Judah or the children of Judah, you hear them discussed. And so we want to talk about tonight what makes those two nations important. Now, you probably have figured out what makes the nation of Israel important, because if you've spent any time reading the Bible at all, you're familiar with them. But the nation of Edom is a little bit trickier. You may not be aware of what that is about and why they deserve their own book of the Bible. So we're going to talk about them tonight. Genesis 36 verses 1 and 9, and this New King James Version says, "Now this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. And this is the genealogy," and then verse 9, in between 1 and 9, is the actual list of names, the bore who begot who, so you can read that on your own time. All of those names, I didn't want to pronounce those. But at any rate, so verse 9 says, "And this is the genealogy of Esau, the father of the Edomites in Mount Seir." So now we know when we're talking about the nation of Edom in the book of Obadiah, we're talking about the descendants of Esau. And hopefully you remember who Esau is, but just in case you don't, we'll talk about him in a minute. Now, Genesis 35, verses 9 through 12, tells us about Jacob, or the children or the descendants of Israel. And it reads as follows: "Then God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram and blessed him. And God said to him, 'Your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be your name.' So he called his name Israel." So when we see or when we read about the nation of Israel, or when we talk about and hear the children of Israel or the children of Judah, because there is a point where the nation of Israel is split geographically, and one half refers to themselves as Judah, and the other half refers to itself as Israel. But all of those people came from Jacob. Those are all of his children. Okay? So, for instance, if we were talking about Miss Sue's descendants, we could say the nation of Sue. And those would be all of her peoples. The nation of John, all his peoples that come after him. Okay, so this is years and years and years of they had kids, they married, they had kids, so on and so on, and they became nations. So now that we know who these two nations came from, let's take a little bit of time to find out about these two men. Okay, so we're talking about Esau's descendants and Jacob's descendants. So Edom, when you see Edom, we're talking about Esau. When you see Israel, we're talking about Jacob. Now, a lot of people, too, back in this time, cities were named after their children. So sometimes you may have seen a city name, and then you will also see it in the genealogy as a person's name. Same thing when you live in a small town. You know, those of us who grew up in small towns, that's not uncommon. For instance, the road right out here, Helton Road. Well, guess who owned a good chunk of the property on the street when it was named? The Heltons did. So, you know, that would be the nation of Helton, whatever. So here we are right here. Just to kind of give you a little bit of insight about that. Okay, so Genesis 25 is going to give us a little bit of genealogy as we're learning about Esau and Jacob. So we're going to read this. I'll read it for you. It's New King James. "This is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren." That means she couldn't have any children, or she had not had any children. "And the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, 'If all is well, why am I like this?' So she went to inquire of the Lord." Now, those of us in here that have had the privilege of conceiving and giving birth, you know how difficult it can be there toward the end when you've got one child moving around in there. Do we have anybody here that had twins? Anybody with twins? Okay, now, first of all, I can't imagine two people. Those are people. Two people in there, and then they are not getting along. They are at war with each other. She says they struggled together within her. And I don't blame her, because she's like, now, Lord, you have blessed me with these kids. If all is well, then why am I like this? What is going on? And so she did as we should do when there's an issue. She went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. And we know who those 2 nations became, the nation of Edom and the nation of Israel. 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over, so they called his name Esau. Esau means red, Edom means red. Okay, so now already she knows, even before she gives birth, that there's going to be some conflict, right? There's 2 nations, and when you say one is going to rule the other, now I don't know about y'all, but that doesn't sound like a lovey-dovey twin relationship. And you know how they talk about twins are, so close, and these 2 young men, no. And so she gives birth, and then so we have the first one out, firstborn Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore him. So 20 years it took for these children to come along. Yeah, 20 years. Now some of us are not patient with God for 2 weeks. And here, he prayed because he was 40 when he got married. So he prayed for 20 years for these children to come along. We don't know Rebecca's age at this time, but it was not uncommon for the women to be quite a bit younger than the men. And since there is no mention of her age, I think we can assume she was childbearing age. Not a miraculous conception. Not quite as miraculous as Sarah, but still, to be married 20 years and you trying to have kids and not, that still is an unusual thing. And so here we have the boys. They have struggled in the womb, and when they're born, the second born comes out with his hand holding the heel of his brother. So it's going to be a rough thing in that household, right? Already, as we see that they're coming out. So, but now, so we look at, this is kind of the beginning of some things that are going to go on. And so what we're going to do is look at what else happens to cause this situation where you end up with these brothers, not only just them being at odds with each other, but their descendants. So that as they are grown to the status of full-blown nations, that they are still substantially at war with each other, that the things that go on in the book of Obadiah have in fact gone on. And so, there's a little bit of something more than just the fact that we didn't get along in the womb, because who would have even remembered that? Their mother would have said, oh, y'all gave me such a hard time. But they are not likely to have remembered that. And it probably made a good, funny story to come out. Esau, when you were born, your brother was holding on to your ankle. But still, it's going to take a little bit more than that for you to have nations that are at war with each other. Genesis 25, verses 29 through 34, and we're not going to read all of that, but it's there if you want to make a note of that to read later, is the account of when Esau trades his birthright to Jacob. He's gone out one day hunting. He comes back in. He hasn't caught anything. He's hungry. Jacob is cooking. You know how it is when somebody's cooking. It smells good. You're hungry. You want some of whatever. And so Jacob bargains with him. I'll give you a bowl of stew. You give me your birthright. And Esau says, what good is this birthright going to do me if I'm standing here about to die? Now, I don't know about y'all, but I've gone a day or two without food. Have you gone a day, at least half a day? I didn't feel like I was on the point of death. I mean, you're hungry, yeah, but you're not going to die. It's going to take more than the one day before you die. And here we have an experienced hunter that would have known how to prepare, or at least, at this point, you're at home. I'm sure that there was more food in the house than just that pot of stew cooking. Go in and grab a biscuit and calm yourself down before you start making these decisions. But Esau doesn't do that because he doesn't value the birthright. We can see at this point, if somebody's coming to you and it's something that, yes, I have it, I was entitled to it because I'm firstborn, but if it's not something that's that important to me, sure, I'll bargain with it. You trade with it. Things that don't have value to you, you easily give away for something that you know you won't have long. Because it doesn't matter how good this stew is, it's only going to last for so long. And then you're going to have to say goodbye to it. Because it's not going to stay, and you're going to be hungry again, right? So if Esau had really valued his birthright, he would not have made that deal. This is what you call a bad bargain. Kind of like if you go somewhere to borrow money or to buy something and they say the interest is going to be 17, 18, 19%, you just put the pen down and walk away. That's a bad bargain, okay? It doesn't matter how desperately you need it. That's going to come back to bite you. It is not worth it, right? There are some deals you just don't make. This was one Esau should not have made. So what is the birthright? It belonged to the firstborn. Now, the father could have given it to a different son if he chose, but historically the birthright belonged to the firstborn male, firstborn son. And it was the authority to rule over the clan. Or the household. That authority was granted to the firstborn. It was also the role of priest in the family. The son who had the birthright, which is typically the firstborn, would have been the one who stood in relationship with God, who stood in covenant with God. He would have been the priest of the household. They would have, everyone else would have done as he said. They would have followed his lead. And so we can see that in Esau's eyes, his empty stomach was more important to him than a relationship with the Lord. And so when we see that with Esau, what is it that, as Pastor Stroud told us on Sunday, to do? We don't judge our brother. What do? We ask ourselves, what have I traded in? What a part of my relationship with the Lord, my covenant that I could have had with God, have I traded in for a bowl of soup? For something that benefited my physical body right now, what spiritual connection have I forfeited? Have I given up? Because Esau's not the only one who cares more for his flesh than his spirit. I'm sure we could all think back on some days where when it was between doing what God wanted us to do or what was right in his eyes or doing what was going to make us feel good right then, right there, we chose us. And that's what Esau did. He gave up his birthright. He traded that to his brother because he didn't value it. He cared more for natural desires than spiritual desires. But this is not the only thing. So here's our first little rift. Well, we've got the first rift, that they couldn't get along and born dude grabbing onto his brother's heel. The second thing we have going on here is, I'm your brother. If I'm coming in and I'm hungry, why are we bargaining? Why don't you just give me something to eat? Why is this even an issue? Again, this gives us the opportunity to look at ourselves. If our brother or sister comes to us and they have a need, are we bargaining with them? What's in it for me? What can I get out of it? When we can it is within us, within our ability, within our power. Obviously, the soup is right there. He wasn't going to eat it all. You've already cooked it. Just share with me. But that didn't occur to him. Well, it wasn't something he was going to entertain. And so we have to be mindful of that as well. When we're in a position to be able to help our brother, are we willingly helping them, or are we only giving to them when we can get something that we think is important back for ourselves? Are we trying to bargain with our brothers? So the next thing that happens, Genesis 21, verses 1 through 29, and you've probably heard this too, when Jacob takes the blessing from Esau. And that is when it's time, Jacob is getting old, Isaac is getting old. He thinks, my time is, I don't know when, how much longer I have on this earth, so I'm going to bless my sons. He tells Esau, go out, because that's his favorite. That's another issue going on in this family. Clear favoritism between the parents. Isaac favored Esau. Rebekah favored Jacob. And they didn't try to hide that. More was one like the other. So as parents, we have to be careful about that kind of thing. As anybody really in a leadership role, we have to be careful about caring more for one than the other, as in this situation here. So Isaac tells Esau, go and, hunt me something, bring it, get it, fix it, the way I like it, and bring it on in, and I'm going to bless you. Well, Rebekah hears about that, and she wants the blessing to go to Jacob. Now, there was a conversation, like we earlier on, where it says the younger is going to rule the older. So perhaps she is saying, okay, well, no, Jacob is supposed to be the one that gets the blessing, so I'm going to make sure that happens. So we have to be careful about that too when we hear the voice of the Lord, when he speaks to us and he tells us how things are going to be. We have to be careful that we don't try to put things in motion to make it happen. We have to believe that God's bigger than us, and that if he says it's going to be a certain way, it's going to be that way. He doesn't need our help to make it that way. Now, if he has spoken to you and told you to do something, then we do that. But when you start conniving and lying and dressing up like somebody else to make it happen, that is not God's will. And that's what goes on. Jacob pretends to be Esau. His dad's old, his vision's failing, dresses up like his brother, cooks something to try to make it taste like that. And he goes in and he takes the blessing. And so when Esau comes in, he's upset, as he would be. My birthright's gone. I squandered that, but still, who remembers that you were the one that did it? All I know is he got my birthright now. My birthright is gone, and now my blessing is gone. And so what was so important about the blessing? As the firstborn, he would have received a double portion of his father's wealth. Because remember, he's going to be the head of the household, head of the clan. If when his dad died, there were still younger siblings there that were still in the house, he would have been responsible for taking care of them. He would have been responsible for taking care of his widowed mom. And so he would have received a double portion because he would have needed that. He would have needed that. He would have received whatever responsibility his dad had, whatever kind of, if there were any legal responsibilities, any of that, he would have received that. But he didn't. So the promise that Jacob got, I think I have a slide with that on there. Yes. Genesis 27, verses 28 through 29. The blessing that he received was, therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. That's quite a nice blessing, isn't it? So that is the blessing that Jacob got from his father that Esau would have gotten. And so as you can see from this blessing, that puts Esau in a position of subservience to Jacob, because, if you're saying nations are going to bow down to you, that means, and even it says, let your mother's sons bow down to you. And so that is putting Jacob in an elevated position over his brother. So that is the blessing that Esau missed out on. And this blessing was irrevocable. So it didn't matter that he got it by deception. Once it was issued out, once it was given, his father couldn't take it back and say, oh, that was the wrong son. Let me do a do-over. I'm going to do a do-over. No. So he does bless Esau, but not at the same capacity. He ends up getting what we would consider an inferior blessing. And as we can see from this one, Jacob receives a promise of divine protection. Those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed. So if you have good sense, you're not going to curse this man, right? Because those curses are going to come back on you. And so we see the importance of this blessing that Jacob received. So, does anybody have any questions on this? Because actually, this is as far as we were going to go tonight. I thought y'all would have some questions, but y'all just looking at me. Are we good? Well, okay. Well, all right. So here we are then with, I don't have slides for the rest, so we'll just go ahead and go into this then. All right, so we have, as we can see, the two brothers. And so now that we know which two nations are going against each other, and we know why, what do we have? Okay, so the content part, as we're going to talk about subjects or topics covered in the book of Obadiah. And part 1, verses 1 through 9, has to deal with Edom's humiliation and destruction. So let me see your Bible, and we'll read those together. Okay, the vision of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom, we have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise thee, and let us rise up against her in battle. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. Thou art greatly despised. The pride of thine heart has deceived thee. Thou that dwells in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. If thieves came to thee, if robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Would they not have stolen till they had enough? If the grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave some grapes? How are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee, that they eat thy bread, have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. Shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom, and the understanding out of the mount of Esau? So this first part, as he is telling Edom's humiliation and destruction, what is to come, because this is a prophecy. He's telling him some things that are going to come. He is saying, now they lived, let me see if I have these pictures, in the cleft of the rock. The town, here we go. Can you see that clear? It's called Petra. You can still go and visit. And they were up, 700 feet up. In these rocks were hewn out businesses and homes. So it was an impregnable fortress, is where the nation of Edom, the Edomites, lived. So they were pretty much protected. When there were times of war, times of battle, people would just kind of go by because there was too much to fool with. So they were safe, really. And they were up high, like an eagle. And you can still go, and that's a temple there that they had. So it was just too much to try to go in, because it's almost like, how do they even get in there? And so then if you're going to try to go in with your army, with your weapons, they would come by and be like, never mind. And so they became prideful, because they were like, nobody's going to come against us. Nothing's going to come against us. They also had a lot of iron ore that they would come down from their mountain living and sell to the neighboring nations at exorbitant prices, because they could. And so that was sort of, when it says in here about the part about their bread, you know how when we say that's my bread and butter, sort of like that's my source of income, my livelihood. Well, that was their livelihood. And so what the prophecy is saying is that all of these allies that you've made, they're going to turn against you. You've been up there and you think, I don't need God, because again, remember when Esau was given the choice, his birthright or the priesthood or that covenant with God, or something to satisfy his natural needs, he chose his natural needs, Same thing with his descendants. They felt like they didn't need God because we live here. Nobody's coming after us. We're safe. We have what we need. We don't need God's protection. We don't need God's guidance. We have wise men among us. We have strong men among us. We're fine. And so the prophecy tells them all of these people that you have made allies with, they're going to turn against you. Because, I mean, how about, sometimes people are your friends because they don't feel like they have a choice. And once they get a choice, they are not your friends, right? And as long as you are on top and you have what I need, then okay, yeah, long live Edom. But once somebody breaches your security, your forces, and that was what was going to happen, that he's telling them, all these people that are supposed to be your allies, they're coming at you. And they're going to use your bread and butter, so to speak. All that iron ore that you sold them at exorbitant prices is coming back at you in forms of weapons that they are going to use to take you down. And they actually do get invaded, because at one point, one nation, after having invaded everybody else, they're like, we got some time on our hands. Let's go and take this challenge. Let's go ahead. There's nothing else going on. Let's go ahead and do what we need to do. So this first part, this prediction of what is going to happen, we see in verses 3 and 4, it says, the pride of thine heart has deceived thee. Now, what other verse does that kind of remind you of? Talk about the pride of your heart has deceived you. Right, but it does, and there's that, and then there's that verse over in Proverbs that tells us what happens when there's pride. Pride comes before fall, before destruction. When we get to where we think, I don't need God, I can do this on my own. We become, self-sufficient, that it's all about us, that we are self-righteous, and that's what was going on with them, that you become even... At one point, it says they are like self-appointed. They're critical of others, because we'll see over in the next section, when we talk about their crimes and stuff, we'll see how they treated their brothers. Now, even though Jacob was not exactly right in what he did, does that excuse the way Edom behaves? It doesn't. And so we'll see that there's still going to be judgment coming. You're still going to have to pay for how you treated your brother. But, and this is part of it. These allies are going to come in. It's your own arrogance. It's your own pride that has led you to this. God made him a nation, and he could have, even with all of, I choose natural things over spiritual things, they still could have turned their heart toward God, but they never did. And that's something that we have to be careful of, that we have to be mindful of, that we don't become so obsessed with what we can do with our own abilities, with our own strength, that we start to think we don't need God. You may be smart, and you may be able to accomplish a lot of things in your own ability, but there's always somebody smarter than you. You may be strong. There's always somebody stronger than you. You may be tough, but there's always somebody bigger and badder than you. But there is no one bigger and badder than God. And so I would much rather line myself up with him and go along the way that he has called me to go than to try to strike out there and do my own thing. As you can see, not only destruction, but the humiliation of it all. And at one point it says that they're going to be wiped off, from the planet, and we will save that for later. But the first few verses, so that just gets us through verse 9. Does anybody have any questions about that part? No? All right. Well, we're going to be ending early then. Okay, we'll stop tonight there, and we'll pick up next week, and we'll cover the next two sections. We'll talk about Edom's cruelty and its crimes, and we'll get some other examples. We'll be in Obadiah, but there's a few other verses that we'll bring to tie in, and then the day of the Lord that happens at the end. But there's also another part too when it talks about. Let's see, does it have it in this part when it talks about them being up high? They are building their nest like eagles up high, up in the stars. That reminds you of somebody else that was, I'm going to make my throne on high, and be cast down. So you see that same vein of pride and arrogance, and that's what it makes us do. So we have to be very careful about that, because the scriptures even tells us that the Lord hates pride, a prideful heart. Why is that, you think? Because whatever other sin we have, none of it is good. But at least you can be in a position where somebody can help you once it's brought to your attention. But when you have somebody with an issue of pride, they don't think they need help. They don't see what they're doing is wrong and that you can show them any better way. And salvation is all about, this is a better way. You can't do this on your own. You need the Lord. This is a better way. And when you've got somebody that's caught up in a prideful spirit, there's really nothing you can do for them but pray that pride, that whatever the fall is that they're coming, that they are facing, that is not something that they can't regroup from. Just pray that when they fall, that at least when they land on their back, they'll look up in the Lord's face and there'll still be time to repent, right? So we have to be careful that you won't ever want to get caught up in pride. So that's something that we can learn from the nation of Edom, as we are reading Obadiah. If nothing else, we can put a check in our spirit to watch ourselves from getting caught up in pride. Amen? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being with us tonight for this first half of Obadiah. We will finish it up next week. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, go ahead and listen to it. And then after we do the wrap up, and after we finish it next week, we'll do a little review. And then there is one video that does a review of it all. We'll let that play all the way through once we've had a chance to discuss it. So again, if you have questions, you can bring those with you next week. I'm going to turn it back over to Pastor Stroud. I don't know. He's smiling at me. I have a glare on my glasses. I don't know what that means. I don't know. No, he's just smiling. Let's greet him as he comes by saying, praise the Lord.